Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Freeform Friday. It's great to have you along. It is Good Friday. I'm curious, how many of your churches have Good Friday services? When I was pastoring in the big church here in Colorado Springs, uh, it we always had Good Friday services, and I was surprised to learn that that wasn't necessarily a common thing. I'm curious, how many of you are planning to go tonight? It is chilly here. That's why I'm wearing my hoodie. Here in Colorado Springs, we tend to have warm brown Christmases and cold white Easters. And sure enough, we're supposed to get 5 or 6 inches of snow tonight, and who knows what it's going to be like. But anyway, um, we're going to talk about thinking here in a few moments, and I'm glad you're along. I look forward to your interaction on this. Before we do that, though, I want to just do a check-in. How goes your plodding? If you happen onto this live stream and haven't been with us, we discussed earlier this year, and in fact several times, about the power of plodding along, of setting out to accomplish something and making time for it slowly and progressively, and looking back after a period and saying, uh, I've done that. I've accomplished that. There's so much that could be done over time that way. One of the things that I mentioned to you back in January for this year was, for me, I want to get my classical guitar chops back. And I can't remember how much of this I've talked about since then, but it was a rude awakening that first week of January. I went back to the earliest warm-up exercises and the simplest compositions that I first started with back in college. And I was starting from actually not just zero, but negative numbers. Someday I'll tell you that story of how I got into the music program. I shouldn't have got in because I didn't know enough to get in, but I faked my way through it, so to speak, and had a lot of catch up to do. So I had to go back to ground zero for sure. And so I did that in January. And though I have played guitar a lot over the last 25 or 30 years, as far as just around the house and working on my son's album and some other things that I'm doing, I hadn't done classical guitar in 25, 30 years. And of course, in my college days, since that was my subject of study, that's what I did most. I ignored other texts, other topics to do classical guitar, and my fingers are starting to remember a little bit, and that's fun. And it's just a few minutes here and there, 10 minutes a day, several days a week, not every day, but several days a week. And my fingers are starting to remember, my mind is starting to remember, and I've got a few very simple pieces under my belt, and I'm making progress. And that's just one example. How are you doing? I know several of you have mentioned things that you set out to do. And you got to keep plugging away and not beat yourself up too much when you miss a day or whatever, but get back at it the next time. Are you progressing? Are you seeing improvement in some of those areas, seeing some accomplishment? We talk about how you need to stop and celebrate, as you reach certain milestones. So I hope hope you are progressing in things. We need to be productive and use our time well, and we can accomplish a lot over time. Megan says, I've got the day off work, so I'll actually be able to chat with y'all more than usual. Tony Galvin and she are going to a Good Friday service at our church. Dale says, my church doesn't, but I'm going to another's. I've added weekend walking to my weekday lunch walks. Excellent. Great to see it. Getting 10,000 steps in. Excellent. Excellent. Good morning. Is it Radu? Is that the way to say your name? Welcome to the live stream. Hey, David Bickard fan. All right. So last Friday, we talked about lazy thinking. Remember that? And someone in our fellowship asked me on Sunday about how to become better at thinking. And as we were talking, and several people joined in, and this was after lunch in the afternoon, and we're just all kind of having a good conversation here. It it dawned on me that for so many people, careful thinking and good thinking is not something we were taught and not something we've pondered and considered too much. And frankly, it's just a skill that most people don't have. Some are better than others based on a variety of things, maybe example by parents or whatever. But as far as giving careful consideration to how we think, it's not something that is emphasized in our day. It used to be. Logic, the science of necessary inference, or the science of using our reasoning faculties well, that used to be standard part of the curriculum for students in school, but it's not anymore. And so anyway, in this conversation we're having on Sunday, I just realized, here I'm explaining the dangers of lazy thinking, and it's common. And someone sort of implicitly suggested that that I spend some time talking about good thinking. So we're going to do that as part of these Freeform Fridays for a while. And I think you'll find it interesting and hopefully helpful. And this is the kind of thing that you can add to your plotting and spend a little bit of time several days a week and get better at thinking. So we're going to talk about that. I see some comments coming in here. David Bickert says he's still on low carb diet, lost a bunch of fat since last year, doing workouts and learning CNC machining as a new skill. Excellent. I love to see that. That's fun, isn't it? He said, your video on critical thinking was insightful, so I shared it around to a few at church. Cool. Radu says, that's exactly right. I'm a regular watcher from Romania. Hey, well, excellent. Glad to have you along. So I chose the first topic on purpose. I figured the thumbnail might get a little attention. And, our tools for thinking are words. As I'm watching my granddaughter, who is 4 months or so in age, and watching her grow and realizing, what is ahead for her in the upcoming weeks, months, years, one of the things that she is going to learn are words. And how is she going to learn them? Well, she's going to hear them from her parents and myself and grandma and others, and from any media exposure she has from us reading books to her, hearing conversations, that kind of thing. We learn words early on from other people. And though I guess in most schools and homeschooling curricula, it's still grammar and that kind of thing is still taught. I don't know if it's emphasized, and the importance we become such a test taking educational society where you just memorize what you need to pass tests without deep and careful thought about things. And words is one of those things. So as an example to kind of launch us into considering our considerations, if you will, let's talk about words for a moment. And in particular, I want to frame it this way. There is no such thing as a bad word. Did you have parents that told you you're not allowed to say that word because it's a bad word? Have you, as a parent, told your kids, we don't say these words because these are bad words? Maybe you hear it, someone says it, there's something on the television you didn't expect or whatever, and you say, no, we don't say that. That's a bad word. Is it? Let's think about that. Is white a good word or a bad word? right? White. White. Is that a good word or a bad word? Well, you might say that's neutral. It's simply a term that refers to a color. Okay. How about love? Is that a good word? Loving someone is a good thing to do, but is the word love a good word? If so, why? Is Jesus a good word? Well, the way some people use it, we would say it's a bad word, wouldn't we? Do you see the point? The word Jesus, or the word white, or the word love inherently have no value. They certainly have no moral value. They are simply combinations of letters and syllables that refer to something. Are you tracking with me? What we mean when we say something is a bad word needs to be thought through. I remember when my second child, my second daughter, she was learning to read and sounding out words. And we were driving somewhere. The whole family was together. It seemed like we were on vacation. I don't remember exactly, but she was sounding out words and reading bumper stickers. And she said what we refer to as the F word because it was on the bumper sticker and she sounded it out perfectly. And of course, my wife and I both were sort of shocked by that. But we didn't turn around and, scold her, certainly didn't discipline her. She had no idea what she was reading. She was doing what we taught her to do. She is seeing words and she's sounding them out and she nailed it. We did tell her that is not a word that we want her to use regularly. But we also didn't want to come down hard and have this fear, this terror of that word, because the word itself is just a word. In other languages, that same combination of consonants and vowels means something totally different. So the word itself is not a bad word, right? So I'm going to go down this path a little further. Not the point is not so much to discuss bad words, but as an example of how to think carefully. When we simply allow someone to tell us these words are bad words, those words are okay words, those are good words, that's lazy thinking. We need to develop a healthy skepticism about everything we think is true. I mean, when you all encourage me in my teaching of the scripture Monday through Thursday, and several people mention, no one teaches like this and it's just so obvious because that's what the word says, what the scripture says. One of the reasons that what I'm saying resonates with you is when you read it, that's what you see too. But the lazy thinking I've been talking about in the world of pastoral ministry and theology, we've been handed down traditions and acceptable interpretations of things that you're not allowed to contradict, lest you be labeled a heretic. I mean, the stuff we've been talking about in Revelation, we're going to get labeled heretics. Well, I am, and you will if you agree with me on these things, because it goes against the authorities that have determined what is true and acceptable to believe. And as soon as we do that, we shut down progress in finding truth and in thinking. We should never be afraid of thinking carefully and people thinking differently from the way we think. Truth will prevail if we are all sincerely seeking to find it. And words are just words. They're simply letters combined and sounds combined to refer to something so we can communicate. Okay, so all of this talk about words here is simply a tool to help us think. And we have to slow down and think about words. One of the most enlightening pursuits of knowledge I ever did was etymology, which is the study of the history of words. I got a big thick book. In fact, well, it's over my shelf. Maybe I'll show it to you sometime. But it took, I forget how many hundreds and hundreds of words in this book, and it would take a Latin root and then give 4 English words that were derived from that Latin root. And I began to see the associations, how language, English has not been around forever, and how Latin and Greek form the foundation of so much of our English language. And when you see how words have developed, it just helps the meaning stick and helps you think carefully about these things. And I know not all of you are going to run out and buy a vocabulary book and study words, but if you do, you will think better. You'll think more carefully as you think more carefully about words and their meanings. Now, we can go too far this way. Words are not static, as I continue to show you in the scripture, even Greek. Even one speaker like the Apostle Paul or Jesus, they don't always use words consistently in the same way every time. So we can become so rationalistic in this that we're forcing the language beyond what it bears. But that's not the danger most of us have. Okay, so let's think through bad words for a moment, okay? David Bickerfan says, I often thought about this in the context of hate speech laws, not quite sure how to think about words in that context, as some are being put in jail for things which I may not consider as hate. Yeah, that is the whole idea of hate speech and hate crimes. That is the result of political agenda. It's hate. Words aren't hate. People hate. It's kind of like guns. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. Same thing with hate. It's a motive. Has nothing to do with the word itself. Megan says, society imposes value and that changes over time. Context and intent is more important, but we are called to wholesome behavior and expression. I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually the passage we're going to go to, and we need to think through that passage carefully as well. All right, so here's the text that Megan just referred to. Ephesians 4:29 says, let no corrupt word go forth out of your mouth. Okay, now just taking that and putting it on a coffee cup, you could see how a parent or a pastor would tell people, here are the list of words that are in the corrupt category, and you shouldn't say them. And certainly for most, the F word would be there. And there are a few other words that might go on that list that you can think of. And the first question that I'm going to ask is that what Paul is speaking of here? Is he concerned that we have this category of corrupt words and make a list of them and make sure that we don't say them? I don't think so. Look at the second half of the verse. Let no corrupt word go forth out of your mouth, but rather, this is a strong adversative that shows this is a parallel structure, not this but that kind of thing. Rather, what is good to the necessary building up, that it may give grace to the hearers. What are the corrupt words he's talking about? Well, here again, thinking about our study of words, this word corrupt, the Greek word, means usually rotten. Now, what do you think of when you hear the word rotten? Daddy O says, regarding good, bad words, yes, but you may have just contradicted yourself by saying F word instead of the actual word, although I do get your point. Yeah, well, I'll explain that here in a moment. That's all very intentional. What's the word rotten? What's the context in which you hear the word rotten usually? It's in the context of fruit, right? Yeah, very good, David. Bickert fan. Fruit. Good fruit is fruit that you want to eat, and it's tasty and it's beneficial to you, right? Rotten fruit is corrupted and you throw it away. It's no good. And that's the point here. Let no rotten word. Well, what would be a rotten word? It's something that doesn't build up your brother. Oh, there's another bug, another gnat, which, as someone pointed out, I survived yesterday. I choked it down. Here's another one. So if it makes its way in my mouth, I may have to shut down early again. That was something. A corrupt word, a rotten word, is one that doesn't build someone up. You see that? Paul here is saying, use your words to build others up, to give grace to your hearers. That's the good fruit, the good word. So the bad word, the corrupt word, is the one that tears down someone and does not give them grace. In the same context, he says down here, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and slander be put away from you. So imagine someone thinking that they are righteous because they don't use these words that are over here on this list of bad words, while at the same time using acceptable and good words to communicate to someone, I hate you, I'm telling lies about you, I'm furious at you, I'm yelling at you, calling you all kinds of names to tear you down. You know that old statement, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Did you ever learn that when you were a kid? What a lie. What a lie. If you have to repeat that stuff to you over and over and over again, it's because somebody's words are hurting you, right? Nobody likes to be insulted. We certainly don't like to be lied about. We don't like to be yelled at, especially by someone that says they love us and so on. This is the kind of thing that Paul's speaking of. When you're talking to other Christians, rotten words, corrupt words, bad words are words that tear down and don't communicate grace. It's not about a list of words that are to be ruled out of your vocabulary because they are inherently bad. Do you see the difference? I've known lots of people that never use explicit language. You know, their language is, rated PG at worst. And yet they violate this instruction all the time with their spouse and their children. Most recently, what Paul has said here is, for this reason, putting away lying, each speak truth with his neighbor, because we are members of one another. Right? Rotten speech is lying and treating others, especially believers, as though we are not in the same family, in the same body. Do you see the point? The Lord is far more concerned, I would say, with that kind of language than he is the things we put on the bad word list. Okay? All right, so let's talk about bad words a little further. Lazy thinking or careless thinking is what causes us to put those list of words and say, okay, we're not going to say those. We can't say those. Those are bad words. What I recommend you do, and this is how we taught our children, is to think this through. It's not a bad word. It is a profane word. I am encouraged, actually, that if you were to look up a movie, as I'm sure many of you do, a movie you're thinking about watching, and there's several parents' guides, there's Common Sense Media, and what's the one, something for kids, I forget, that we used to use. Even just IMDb has a parents' guide section. If you, Kids in Mind, that's what it is, Kids in Mind. If you look up movies in any of those kind of sites, they have, in addition to sex and nudity and violence, they typically, at least some of them, have a section on profanity. Now that's perfect, because the real issue in the quote bad word category is profanity. Now sometimes it's explicit language, right? And one of the reasons, Daddy-O, that I'm not using it here is because I'll get a warning put on my video if I use any of those, if I actually say the word, and I don't want that. Plus, not everybody is maybe as open-minded as I am about these things. Sonna says, I'm not near as worried with language as I am sexual content. Yeah, and I think that's the right place to be. So do you know what profanity is? If you were to look up the etymology of profane, you would see that in the Latin, there is a root word, fanus, which means temple. And there is a prefix, pro, which means from, can mean before, or out of. And the idea is it is removed from the temple. It means common. David Bickfan says the meaning of profane is to treat something sacred with abuse, irreverence, contempt, or desecrate. Yeah, and more basically, it means common. So there was, in ancient Latin, there was a distinction made between the sacred and the common. Right? So think about a toilet or a chamber pot. It's common to man, right? For all of human history, going back to Adam, I'm sure, something like a toilet has been common to man. But you wouldn't, in fact, in the Old Covenant law, it was forbidden from, they were forbidden from bringing a chamber pot into the temple, because that was sacred space, holy space. And one of the ways in which God wanted to be regarded as holy was to keep that common experience of all humans away from the temple. And there were certain vessels, right? Pots and pans and utensils that were sacred because they were used in the temple. And yet people out in their homes would use the same kinds of bowls, and the wealthy might even have gold ones. It wasn't the fact that it was a bowl, and it wasn't that it was made out of gold that made it holy or sacred. It's the fact that it was in the temple. You see the difference? So the priests would wear certain vestiges, certain robes and things in the temple, and they were holy because they were for the temple, and they could wear something that was designed the same way out in their fields, even in their homes, and that was for common use. People could wear tunics and things out in common use. So the idea was profane. Profanus meant away from the temple. Common. So the reason that I told my children there are certain terms that I don't want you to use in regular discourse is because they take something that is intended to be sacred and treat it as though it were common. For example, sexual intercourse between a man and his wife is sacred and holy to God. Now, in a sense, you could say it's common because it's supposed to be the common practice of every husband and wife. But it is intended for a specific relationship. What our culture has done, and what every culture has done, is taken that experience that is reserved for, that is set aside in that sense, holy, between a husband and his wife, and said, no, it can be done by anyone, anywhere, with whomever they want. They've profaned it. They've treated it as though it is not a holy experience, but a common one. So that's why I can use the term sexual intercourse, or I could use a euphemism like we see in Genesis 4 that says, I knew my wife in the biblical sense, and none of you would freak out. None of you would hide your children and cover their ears, and I won't get an explicit warning on my video. But if I use the, quote, F word, that has become this word that we're not allowed to say, even though, we're saying it all the time these days. That's the reason why we need to think through, should we use profanity? You see the point? So again, with my children and in our household, we don't use the F word, and we don't write it even if we put asterisks in. I see that all the time with people and Christians. Now, sometimes it's because, social media, there are people that search for these words and then want to send all kinds of illicit spam and so on. So I get it. It's kind of like, even shooter I saw yesterday with the tragedy that we saw again. Lots of people on social media spelling it SH00 instead of OO. And that's wise to avoid getting people you don't want searching you out. But a lot of Christians who would never say the word will write it, or they'll say effin'. Which, really, is that any different than just saying the word? So we taught our kids, and the practice that we have in our household is we do want to regard that act as sacred in the sense that it's reserved for husband and wife. So we're not going to treat it as profane and common to anybody, anywhere, all the time. You see the difference? How about the word damn? D-A-M-N. Well, that's short for damnation. And it's another form of the word, or it means the same thing as condemnation. If I talk about damnation in hell, and I'm serious and somber about it because of the weightiness of that situation, I'm not using profanity, right? But people use the word damn all the time to talk about this bug, this condemned bug that's flying around and wants to get in my mouth. You see the difference? See what we've done? If I say this condemned bug in my mouth, you'd be like, well, that's funny. But if I said this damned bug with a certain tone in my voice, suddenly it's, oh no, don't let the kids hear that. Why? It's because we haven't thought carefully about the use of language. Now, I do think there is danger in using words like hell and damned for everyday frivolous stuff. It dilutes the seriousness of hell and damnation and the lake of fire and all those things that we talk about, right? But we do this all the time. We do this with love. I love God. I love coffee. I love my wife. I love that TV show, whatever. We do the same thing. Words do not carry the same weight all the time. But it does water down the seriousness of something like eternal condemnation. If we, people talk about, experienced hell on earth because they had a hangnail or whatever, and it really hurt kind of thing. So there again, we're taking this sacred concept of God's wrath and treating it as though it's common. That's why historically Christians have avoided using profanity. What boggles my mind and shows just how little we think, even as Christians, if I say to you, my dog expelled his feces in my front yard, you wouldn't give that a second thought. You wouldn't hide your children. Why didn't Doug warn us? He said feces. Today, for most people, if I said my dog took a crap in the front yard, you'd be like, well, that's kind of crass. But, whatever. I'm not going to hide my kids. Now, when I was young, I wasn't allowed to say the word crap. That was a bad word in my household. But still, you wouldn't run and say, I'm never listening to that guy Doug again because he said that word. Most of you wouldn't. Maybe some of you would. But if I use a synonym for crap, I can say dung, I can say poop. But if I use a synonym that starts with an S and ends with hit, I'm going to get marked on the video, and some of you are going to be appalled. I was teaching on this years ago, preaching on it in a message and sermon, and I could tell my wife, her eyes were big. She just knew where I was going. She knew I was going to say it, and I almost did. But for some hopefully wise reasons, I chose not to, just like I'm choosing not to now. But do you see how ridiculous it is that we can use the word poop and crap and feces, and there's another word that starts with S that means exactly the same thing, but for some reason we've put that on the list of bad words, and you wouldn't want people using that word around your kids? That's nonsense, people. Think. That's nonsense. How can you profane poop? There's nothing holy. There is no context in which that can be holy. It is the most common thing there is. So you can't profane it. But that's how irrational Christians are. We just arbitrarily decide these words are bad words without thinking. So for us, let's be better thinkers. And let's consider profanity as what it is and realize the word itself is not a bad word, regardless of what word it is. It's the meaning and the intent behind it, which leads to a question. The F word is now used so commonly for so many different things that it's going the way of so many other words that used to be, forbidden, profane, and now are pretty common, I think within a generation or two, it's just going to be a non-issue. You see what I mean? Because there's nothing inherently evil about the combination of consonants and vowels and so on. Let's be careful thinkers. And this is just one example of how we need to think of all kinds of things. And it takes effort, and it takes some sort of quiet, reserved time to ponder and get to the heart of the issues. And I would encourage you, if you are appalled that someone would say or write a profane word, but they're gentle, loving, encouraging people with their other words, but because they use profanity some, you are just appalled. And then someone else who doesn't use any profane word, but just rips people apart with their words or lies. You can't trust them. They're manipulative and deceitful. You have your priorities mixed up biblically. Now, you might argue the best, most righteous thing to do is to do neither, and I think you can make a good argument. But I've known plenty of Christians who turn a blind eye or ear to the abusive speech and hold people who are abusive in their speech in high esteem, and others who are far more Christ-like as I see it, but they have more colorful language, so to speak. Get the point? All right, so I think I've made my point. I'll leave it there. David Bickert fan says, I don't think I've thought of profanity in this way before. Good, we'll keep thinking. Dale says, I get not wanting to get banned, but there is a vanity in someone with 2 followers typing, yes. Seggs, S-E-G-G-S. That's funny. Yes. Eddie says, I'm a pastor, and probably 15 years ago I was teaching, and as an example, I said that 100 years from now that word could become acceptable because cultural changes and older ladies struggle with. Yeah, exactly. The older lady was just taught wrong. And in past generations, I would probably have said, don't use the F word, because then it was associated with a profane view of sexuality. Now it's not. I don't use it. I don't go around saying it. But like in movies and things, it just doesn't bother me. It's also telling. I know of Christians who will talk about the shows they watch that are filled with using the name Jesus or Christ profanely, but they don't use the F word or the S word. I think if you're not more offended at someone taking the name of our Lord and using it as profanity than you are feces synonym, again, your priorities are mixed up. Dale says, even more annoying to hear the censor terms in normal life speech. Once received a physical letter with asterisks in words. Yeah, as long as you put the asterisks in, it's okay to write it. It's funny. D.A. Carson said it to a youth audience once. It did take me back. Yeah, in that dumb that we've all been there probably. Cool. Sana says, it reminds me of the South Park episode years ago. See, I don't watch South Park. You sinner. With the S counter when they could say first on TV. It was so dumb. Yeah, that may mean somebody else. I just have never watched that. I can honestly say I've never seen an episode of that or The Simpsons. I think that makes me more righteous than you, probably. We would do well to read James 3 and in humility govern and subject our speech to the Lord. Absolutely. And are you saying that, Daddy-O, in the context of the speech there in James 3 is lying and, again, abusive speech, right? It's not a section of words that we put on a list. Catriel says, this is interesting to me because I've considered this very thing often. Yeah, good, I guess. Are sarcasm and jokingly insulting people something Christians should be doing? Boy, that's a good question and probably deserves a lot more time here, and we're getting late. It like so many things, it comes down to definition. Etymologically, sarcasm has the concept of a cutting. And we even use that almost euphemistically now, right? If the intent is to cut someone, to belittle them, to make them look bad, then yeah, that's sin. That's wrong, right? If it's playful, I don't see the sin in it. Now there is a subjective element of that, right? What I may intend as playful, brotherly, right? It's kind of like little brothers rolling around in the dirt, just beating the tar out of each other when they're 4. That's what they do. And we are wired that way. And one of the things that I think is destructive in our culture is we try to drug that out of boys and censor it out of men. It's part of what makes us men is the sparring and the iron sharpening iron idea. Now we can take that too far, and when the sparring and joking and just sort of the manliness that we have naturally does transition to abuse, even if that wasn't our intent, we need to apologize. We need to back off. We need to once we see we've actually hurt someone, we need to feel regret over that and stop and make amends. So that's the distinction that I would make. Playful banter, especially among people who love each other, I think is great. I think it's just sort of how we're wired. I think most women don't like it and don't take it the way men do. And then certainly men who've been so influenced by feminism receive it more like women do. The short answer, Dale, is there's some subjectivity here, and I think we do need to keep thinking that through. But I don't think joking is inherently bad. But what you think sounds like a joke may not come across as a joke, and your right to joke probably shouldn't trump the sense in which someone takes it. Now, again, that can be abused as well, right? We have our censors and people trying to control our speech, not because they're actually offended, but because they're trying to be controlling. That's no good either. Tony says, at my old job, if someone said Jesus' name in vain, they were asked to complete the sentence with, was born in a manger. That's great. That's good. Yeah, so Megan is making the point, and this is not a good or bad or slam on women. That's been the general feedback that I've gotten over the years from women is they tend to take sarcasm as discouraging and tearing down, and men, especially who grew up with good fathers, don't. So there's something to that, I think. Chris Howland official says, I had a buddy who was very respectable in terms of his witness, but he justified use of cursing in the midst of unbelievers in order to be more relatable to them and speak their language. Even that word cursing, right? What does that even mean? Cursing would be traditionally, etymologically, to pronounce a curse on someone. Using a synonym for feces is not pronouncing curse on anyone. Yeah, I mean, if you have to use profanity to speak their language, that seems like a weak argument to me. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, Megan, you're right. And yeah. Yeah, very good. All right. Well, we've gone. Wait, I appreciate your comments. It's good discussion. And whether or not you are persuaded by everything I say here, I hope at least it will cause you all to give more thought to thought and thinking. And we'll talk more about some of those things down the road. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone. And celebrate the resurrection of our Lord on Sunday, just like you should on every Sunday, and Monday, and Tuesday, and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And we will see you back here on Monday to continue on in Revelation. Grace and peace to you.